Hello everyone, and welcome to this outdoor episode of Unearth Horticulture. It is a chilly February afternoon and it's a little bit windy, but we're gonna make it work for us because today I have a very seasonal topic that is important to accomplish this time of year, and that is pruning your fruit trees. Now, many of you have fruit trees on your yards and you might not even know it. They're just ornamental fruit trees like crab apples or pears. But there are also those of you that have fruit trees like apples and cherries and apricots and peaches that you actually are producing fruit off of. And sometimes fruit production can be kind of a gray area for even the best horticulturists. So today we're going to talk about both why we're pruning our fruit trees this time of year and also how to do it. So let's go take a look. There are three main reasons that you need to prune your fruit trees this time of year. The first reason is that it is cold outside. And with the lower temperatures, with it freezing during the nights, and the fact that there is no green vegetation around this time of year, that means that there is fewer insects and also fewer microorganisms that are floating around in the environment right now. Why is that important? It is because when you are making pruning cuts on trees in particular, you're stressing the tree out. It actually sends out stress hormones, and that can attract insects to come and munch on it and even attract microorganisms and disease that can cause problems for your trees down the road. So it's actually quite good to prune any woody species during the winter months simply because there's less living things right now. The second reason has to do with structural pruning. Structural pruning sounds really technical, but all it means is it allows you to see this time of year, since there's no foliage on the trees, no leaves, it allows you to better see the structure of the tree. You can see the scaffold branches or the branches that are forming the overall shape of the tree. And it allows you to be a little bit more strategic about the branches that you're taking off. Going along with structural pruning, the third reason and the main reason it's important to prune fruit trees in particular this time of year has to do with bud exposure and when that new growth is flushing on in the spring. So fruit producers often think about bud locations on trees. It's kind of a weird thing. First of all, actually, let me go back and give you a little botany rundown really quick. So what is a bud? A bud is a little scale-like bump that occurs on the stem of a plant, and that bud can produce new leaves, it can produce a flower, or it can produce another branch or another stem. And that bud is able to differentiate growth based on the environment around it. And with fruit comes from flowers. If the flower is pollinated, it can produce fruit. So it's really important that you want your buds to produce flowers, and largely flower initiation in buds is controlled by light exposure. So it makes sense that you would want your buds exposed to as much light as possible to encourage flower production and in turn fruit production. So when you're pruning, you're structurally pruning your fruit tree this time of year, you're able to see where the buds are in the tree, and you're able to take out branches to allow good canopy light penetration to get on and make contact with those buds in order to produce not only a better number, the right quantity of fruit, but also larger fruit. So that has to do, bud development is something that fruit producers highly pay attention to, and it can vary greatly by tree species, how you structurally prune your tree. But I hope that makes sense. So when spring comes and temperatures increase and daylight expands, so you're gonna have more quantity of light that way, and then also rain comes, you're gonna have higher moisture, you can flush out new growth, and those buds on fruit trees are producing flowers right away in the spring, especially on stone crops like apricots and peaches and cherries. All of those are producing their flowers right off the bat in the spring, and so it's really important that they have good light exposure and proper pruning, so you have the right amount of buds and all the technical stuff. Now, if you're not, we're gonna get into this next. So those are your three reasons why you need to prune your fruit trees this time of year. All right, we are at the apricot tree and it is a little bit windy, so bear with me. I mean, we are horticulturists and we know how to deal with wind in Kansas, so we can take it, right? Okay, so first things first. Oh, here's my apricot tree. I almost took off a branch right there. That is not how to properly prune. We need to look at our tools. So with fruit trees, it's really quite paramount that you start with clean tools, sharp tools. So when you make pruning cuts, actually not just with fruit trees, this goes with anything. When you're making pruning cuts, you want to make sure that your tools are sharp so that they're clean and nice and smooth, so you're not causing extra stress to the tree. The reason you want to start with clean tools, sanitized tools, like with rubbing alcohol, is because fruit trees in particular have a few nasty diseases that can be easily spread from tree to tree with pruning tools, especially if you have multiple trees that you're pruning. So I suggest if you're doing more than one fruit tree that you sanitize your tools in between trees. If that makes sense. This is a little bypass pruners. This is very common to see around, and this is probably something you'll be working with. I also have a saw here, a manual saw. This thing is very sharp, very handy, and I can readily replace the blade on it. They're not that expensive. I'd really encourage you to get one if you've got some young trees that you want to try your hand at structurally pruning. You can also use a loppers, and I don't have one with me today because I don't have any branches that are larger. You can use a saw or a lopper depending on what you can reach with. For branches that are larger than 1 inch diameter, or branches that you can't fit into the mouth of your pruners. So there's your little tool rundown. I've been sticking up with this tree. I've been staying up with this tree. So there's not any branches, I don't believe, that I'm gonna need to actually get a bigger tool out for. So I should be able to just use my handy dandy pruners. That's a lesson, another lesson to keep in mind. Stay up with your young tree pruning so that you don't have issues where you have to take off branches that are bigger and bigger and bigger. That's more stressful for the tree and harder for you. All right, let's take a step back first and look at the structure of the tree. You can see Dash is hanging out with me today. Let's take a look at this tree. So fruit trees in essence, I mean, like I said, they vary by species, but they're usually lower. You start training their branches lower on the tree because easier for picking, and also they're not very tall species of trees. Usually they're at most 20 feet, sometimes 30 feet with some apples, and pears can be quite tall. But peaches and apricots in general aren't going to be very tall trees structurally. So it's important to know your species. I guess that's a good second step. Get your right tools, and then second, know your species that you're working with. And then just kind of take a look. The first thing you want to remove is any dead growth. So you're looking for branches that don't have buds on them and maybe have a little bit discolored look to them. Or maybe they're even just hanging off the tree already. Any damaged growth, any dead or damaged or something that looks diseased. So I'm just going to take a look. I'm going to take a look-see. I'm not seeing really any dead growth. And that has to do with this tree being a little bit on the young side. It's 5 years or younger, and I'm not really remembering when I planted this, to be honest, but it's quite a young fruit tree. Most fruit trees, when you're a commercial fruit producer, they usually trade out trees. They take them out and replant trees every like 10 to 20 years, depending on the species. But you're going to start seeing an increased rate of disease and growth, or disease and dead growth, dead branches occurring when the tree is starting to mature and get older. Also, if you're dealing with drought stress or any other stresses in the environment, that can happen more. I have been babying this tree. It's been a little bit of a specimen for me because it's so beautiful to bloom in spring. Second, you want to look for crossing branches. So this is when we're structurally looking at the tree. You don't want crossing branches because, number one, it's bad for the tree. It can cause breakage. They can rub against each other. It can cause damage. But also that crossing growth is going to shade buds. So right here you can see that this branch here, when the wind blows in Kansas, as it does, these two branches have been rubbing on each other because they're crossing. And you can see what occurs when that happens is damage on both branches, physical damage on their bark, can cause a wound. and it shades itself. And you can see that it's rubbing here from here. There's a little wound there, and then on the back of that branch it's rubbing too. So both here and there. Perfect example of why cross branching doesn't work. So now that we've identified a problem location, now the next thing is to remove the crossing branch. And usually I remove the smaller of the two branches because first of all, it's easier, and second of all, it's a better structural tactic. And here I said I didn't need my loppers, but yes, I needed my loppers. So before I make this cut, I need to mention there are proper ways to make pruning cuts on trees. The first step is you remove the weight. You remove the weight off the tree. Let's do that first. Let's do this step by step. Remove the weight. So you take a cut that is at least 6 inches away from where you want your final cut to take place. All right, so there was my weight removal cut, and I'm gonna untangle this carefully to knock off too many buds. All right, so there's that crossing branch, and I'm gonna definitely, that's really cool. I'm gonna get a close-up of that wound for you. All right, now you can see exactly where the wound is on the other branch. And you can make a decision. You can cut off that wounded area, or if it's kind of nice and healed up, you can leave it be. And you know, honestly, that looks not bad. So I think I'm gonna let it be. So after you've removed the weight, the second step is to make an undercut if it's a really heavy branch. Now, this branch is less than 1 inch diameter, so I am not going to do the second step because there is no risk for peeling down the bark on the cut. And what I mean by that is when you take a top cut on a tree branch and you get to the very bottom of your cut, it tends to happen where the branch splits off and it peels the bark down the side of the tree, and that's really unhealthy. It creates a bigger wound. So to avoid that, we undercut by a 1/2 inch or so to make sure that it breaks that bark there so it doesn't split. But there's no weight on this that I'm cutting off, so we're gonna go ahead and do the third step, which is making the final cut. And when you make the final cut, there's what's called a collar, and you just don't want to cut too close. So you can see here where I made the cut. I was talking about the collar earlier and the angle where the branch attaches. So you can kind of see it wrinkles up here. And you don't want to cut into this point because there's a protection zone in the tree that actually seals off this wound, and no disease can get past this barrier, this collar. So if you cut into that collar, you're risking the rest of the tree getting disease. So this will help make sure that there's a good reactive response, wound response, and this will heal over. The cut you just made will heal over, and there'll be less risk for decay. So we've now discussed how to make a pruning cut, proper pruning cut. We've also discussed a couple of steps of what you're looking for when you're pruning your fruit trees. The main two things when you're pruning is you want to remove the dead growth, the disease growth, and the crossing branches to prevent dead or diseased growth. But then you can also kind of take a look, and if you really do want good fruit production, see this apricot, I don't actually have a second apricot, so it doesn't pollinate and produce fruit. Because I don't like to deal with the mess of fruit. Just ask my mother. And so I actually I grow this tree for ornamental value. So I'm not as much worried about the density of branches. But if you are and you want to take it a few steps further, the next step would be to prune for density. And you're going to look and make sure that you don't have too much density in your canopy, depending on your fruit tree species. That is where I would refer to a little bit more to extension articles, because there are quite a few extension articles out there about home gardening and fruit production. I might try to put a few of those linked in here in the description below. But I'm going to continue to look for crossing branches and any kind of damaged growth and any structural things that I want to do. If I need to, since this is ornamental and it's over a pathway, if I need to limb up any branches, limbing up literally just means to take limbs off that are lower so that the limbs are upward, they're higher on the tree. So I'm just gonna take a look and see if there's any crossing the path that I need to get rid of. I found another crossing branch I want to show you. Ugh, come with me. Okay. So honestly, this whole process is a lot of walking around the tree. I'm sure you kind of saw me doing that and kind of tugging on branches, you know, to see where they're crossing, where they're rubbing with one another. And that's how you find your crossing branches. Now, sometimes I miss them year to year, and this is a fine example of ones that I would have missed. It's good to catch them when they're really young and kind of picture where branches are going to trail off into, where their trajectory is going, and that helps you to get them early. But sometimes, like this, in this case, right here, you can kind of see it squinting into the sunlight. You miss them. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this off, actually way down to about right here, and I'm gonna show you that when it's done. So here is my crossing branch, and honestly, it's causing a problem. This branch out here that's jutting out is going to cause a problem for this branch. It's already crossing over there. So I'm going to take it all the way back down to where this branch is filling in. I've already made a cut, it looks like, out there. So this is what would be called a subordinating cut. You're taking off the main trajectory branch and you're letting one of its side branches kind of take over. And it's good not to do this with too big of branches. Honestly, I should have taken some weight off of that, but it was kind of being supported by the tree here. So now the trick is to get this guy out of here. Here you can see where I made that cut. It's got nice rings to it. And there's that growth coming out. Honestly, then I've already subordinated that branch out there. But it was good not to take it all off because there's kind of a gap in the tree right here. I hope you gleaned some helpful information from this episode on fruit tree pruning. If you have any questions, as always, make sure you drop them in the comments below. And until next time, you've been watching Unearth Horticulture. Now I gotta go pick up all these branches.